our family lives, for our spiritual lives, for our political life. So he offers some very specific steps in this book to try to offer a sort of political order that challenges this culture of contempt. Finally, one last slide, and I always like Richard Foster, Celebration of Discipline, and this actually brings us back not only to Lincoln's maxim for a free society, but it brings us back to last week's talk about the importance of imagination. Imagination can be an important part of prayer. I was just talking about prayer, how like with God's help, like maybe we could do some of these things, but imagining as we're praying what it would look like to have reconciliation with family members, with friends, with people of the opposite political party, with people that you normally don't hang out with. Like imagining that. What I mean by that is actually trying to visualize that as you are praying for it. I will with God's help, right? So, I hope that I've given us something to think about here. I don't know how much time we have left, but I'm certainly willing to answer any and all questions. And thank you.
Comments and questions? I'll say while folks are gathering their thoughts, I was listening just the other day to Krista Tippett on Being podcast about conflict and the difference between good conflict and high conflict, which is like this intractable, like where the conflict is the point, instead of trying to come to terms, trying to be curious or have humility about what my questions are, to imagine what it would be like if we could resolve this. And so much of this is resonating.
I came with a commercial. Our speaker today has written a wonderful book called Liberty and Union. And here is what it says on the back. This is from Professor of History at Rutgers. At last, a brilliant, imaginative, and original re-examination that synthesizes the histories of the Civil War, of constitutional and legal development, and of the African-American experience. The result is a masterful and beautifully written study that will stand out as a superb contribution. I have a copy of this, and it is dense and fascinating and very readable. So I recommend it. I don't know if Novel sells it yet, but Tim, it is wonderful.
Tim, did Lincoln have help in writing some of his speeches, or did it all come from his heart?
It all came from him. I mean, this is one of the differences in 19th century American politics and the 20th and the 21st century. I mean, Lincoln wrote all of these words. I mean, Lincoln is a political thinker, and a skilled one, and a sophisticated one, and a profound one, who's thinking through all these issues about what it means to be American, what the Declaration of Independence said and what it meant, what it has to do with the Constitution. He lives in this constitutional culture where there's a lot of talk about the Constitution, but Lincoln is like the abolitionists in that he's trying to take us back to the Declaration of Independence. And he's doing that in a very thoughtful and in a very sophisticated way. But yet, he's actually writing all of these words himself. Thank you for asking that. Yeah.
I've got a quick question along those lines. I appreciate these references to the founding documents, the Declaration of Independence, and the Constitution. Do we know what Lincoln, or how Lincoln may have approached those documents? Was he sort of an originalist, like these are the words that we have and that they meant in this time period? Or was he thinking of this as a more fluid document that would take on new shades of meaning with time? Do we know?
It's a good question, and there's no easy answer to that. I mean, so Lincoln is engaged in a debate over what the founders meant. So in that sense, he's part of a sort of originalist culture, for lack of a better word, only 70 or 80 years after the founding, that's trying to make sense of the previous generation's work and their words. The biggest debate is over the founding fathers and slavery. And Lincoln is arguing that the founders wanted to put the United States on an anti-slavery path, and that what had happened is that the Democratic Party, especially the Supreme Court in the 1850s, had changed that and were basically arguing that slaveholding was a constitutional right, which Lincoln did not think that the founders believed because they had not put that language into the text. So for the most part, they're arguing on kind of the terms of trying to understand what the founding generation wanted. At the same time, though, Lincoln also understood that the Constitution had some limitations. And that's why at the end of his life, in the last year, he argues so forcefully for an amendment to the Constitution in order to end slavery. He thought that was absolutely necessary, and of course it ended up being ratified, but not until several months after he was killed.
Tim, can you say a brief word about Lincoln's education and also about his faith background?
Sure, and so I touched on this briefly in the first few moments, but he was, for the most part, self-educated. As he sort of put it this way: he was educated by littles, in the sense that he only went to school for short periods of time. So he was mostly educated by his stepmother and on his own, just trying to read everything that he possibly could. And that was also true when it came to his own sort of legal education. Most early 19th century lawyers studied with some prominent lawyer. He never did. He read Blackstone's commentaries on his own and was just able to absorb so much, and was so smart and was so able to deal with those works in that way. The faith background is a big, complex issue, but I'll just say one thing briefly. His parents were hard-shell Baptists, which means they were basically Calvinists, and toward the end of his life, there's a lot of evidence that he kind of embraced that. I mean, if you look at his speeches in the last few years of his life, he really believes in fate, and he believes that he's an instrument in the hand of God, and that the nation is on this path, and he's not really controlling events. Events are controlling him, and that's a very fatalistic, very Calvinistic view.
Y'all, we could do this all day. Aren't we lucky that Tim is here? And I'm just going to volunteer that he'll entertain your questions one-on-one today. And, anytime you catch him in the hallway, he's around, professor on site. We're so fortunate. Thank you so much, Tim. I just want to say one brief word before I let you out, just to connect some dots. We've heard some great stories about these historical figures: Abraham Lincoln, C.S. Lewis, Prathia Hall this fall. And every time that our scholars and residents have been able to say, and this is what this might have to say to us today about our faithfulness and our place in history. And we're going to make this wonderful turn in the next couple of weeks to looking at the future of faith. You know that LPS is coming. You've seen the pictures go up and the great people who are going to be here to speak to us Wednesdays, Thursdays, and Fridays at Calvary. We're going to have a conversation in here this coming Sunday where we're going to look at who all's coming. Your three clergy folk are going to do their best to facilitate a little bit of conversation about where we've been, and more significantly, what we're looking at. What does the future of faith look like? What is this moment in time, and how are we casting ourselves ahead into the future? So it's going to be a great season, and I hope you all come back for some conversations in here and some great preaching in there. Thanks.